The stars had always called to Zara Voss with a voice sweeter than any earthly melody. As she watched them streak past the viewport of her research vessel, the verdant explorer, she felt that familiar thrill of discovery coursing through her veins. 3 years of deep space botanical surveys had led her to this moment approaching Valthara, a planet whose biosignatures suggested plant life unlike anything in the known galaxy. Her fingers danced across the holographic interface, adjusting the ship's descent trajectory. The planet below swirled with impossible colors, forests that seemed to shimmer between silver and gold, floating islands suspended in mid-air by some unknown force, and vast networks of crystalline structures that pulsed with their own inner light. It was everything she dreamed of and more. Beginning atmospheric entry in 30 seconds, she murmured into her recorder, her voice barely containing her excitement. Initial scans indicate a breathable atmosphere, with oxygen levels at 92% of Earth standard. The electromagnetic readings are unprecedented. It's almost as if the entire planet is conducting some form of energy. The first sign of trouble came as a gentle tremor through the ship's hull. Zara frowned, checking her instruments. The readings were fluctuating wildly, as if something was interfering with her equipment. The tremor became a shudder, then a violent shake that sent her crashing against the control panel. Warning: multiple system failures detected, the ship's AI announced in its maddeningly calm tone. Primary navigation offline. Structural integrity compromised. Recommend immediate emergency protocols. Zara's training kicked in as she fought to maintain control. Her hands flew over the emergency controls, trying to stabilize the descent. But it was like trying to fly through a hurricane of pure energy. The planet's surface rushed toward her with terrifying speed, the crystalline forests growing larger and more detailed with each passing second. The impact came with a sound like the universe cracking open. Metal screamed against stone, and the world spun in a nauseating kaleidoscope of colors. Zara felt herself thrown forward, her safety harness the only thing keeping her from being flung through the viewport. Then darkness claimed her, soft and merciful. When consciousness returned, it came slowly, like surfacing from deep water. Zara's first sensation was warmth, not the recycled air of her ship, but something organic and alive. Her second was the sound of music. If music could be made from the whisper of wind through crystal and the gentle hum of growing things. She opened her eyes to find herself lying on a bed of what looked like silver moss, impossibly soft and somehow luminescent. Above her, a canopy of leaves filtered light that seemed to come from the plants themselves rather than any sun. The air was thick with the scent of growing things, not the sterile, controlled environment of her ship's hydroponics bay, but something wild and intoxicating. You're awake. The voice came from somewhere to her left, melodic and touched with an accent she couldn't place. I was beginning to worry that the impact had damaged more than just your vessel. Zara turned her head carefully, expecting pain from the crash, but finding only a strange, tingling sensation throughout her body. What she saw made her breath catch in her throat. He was tall, perhaps 6.5 feet, with a lean build that spoke of strength without bulk. His skin held a faint luminescence, marked with intricate silver patterns that seemed to shift and flow like living tattoos. His hair was the color of starlight, falling in waves to his shoulders, and his eyes, those eyes were the deep green of forest depths, ancient and knowing. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "Where am I? My name is Kellen," he said, settling beside her with fluid grace. "You're in the Whispering Grove, about 2 miles from where your ship came to rest. I brought you here after the crash." The crash memory flooded back, and Zara struggled to sit up. "My ship, the research data, is safe," Kellen assured her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. The touch sent an unexpected jolt of awareness through her. "Your vessel is damaged, but intact. Your metal box continues to speak, though I don't understand its words." Zara blinked, processing this. "You mean the emergency beacon? You can hear it?" "I can hear many things," Kellen said, his expression growing thoughtful. "The trees told me of your arrival long before you fell from the sky. They spoke of one who would come from the star paths, carrying knowledge of the growing world." "The trees told you?" Zara studied his face. looking for signs of delusion or jest, but found only sincerity. That's impossible. Plants don't communicate in any way that. Her words died as she became aware of something extraordinary. The silver moss beneath her was warm, almost pulsing with a gentle rhythm. The crystalline trees around them seemed to be listening. She could feel their attention like a physical weight, curious and welcoming. Your science tells you it's impossible, Kellen said, following her gaze, but you can feel it, can't you? The awareness, the connection. Zara's hand went instinctively to her side, where she kept her botanical scanner. The device was there, somehow undamaged, and she pulled it out with trembling fingers. The readings made her gasp. The entire grove was alive with bioelectric activity, patterns of communication flowing between the plants, like neural pathways in a vast brain. This is incredible, she whispered. The electromagnetic signatures, the organized biopatterns, it's like the entire ecosystem is one massive organism. Not one organism, Kellen corrected gently. A community, a conversation that has been going on for millennia. He stood, offering her his hand. Come, there's something you need to see. Against her better judgment, Zara took his hand. The moment their skin touched, she felt it, a surge of connection that went beyond the physical. Images flashed through her mind, vast networks of root systems sharing nutrients and information. Songs of growth and renewal that echoed through, forests of crystal and light, and underneath it all, a growing darkness that threatened to silence the music forever. She gasped, pulling back. But Kellen held her steady. What was that? She demanded. A glimpse of what we call the deep harmony, he said, his eyes sad. And its opposite, the silence that spreads from the eastern shores, killing everything it touches. Killing, but the scans showed this planet teeming with life. The scans were taken from orbit, Kellen said, helping her to her feet. They couldn't see what hides beneath the surface. Come, I'll show you why the trees called for you. As they walked through the grove, Zara couldn't help but marvel at the beauty around her. The crystalline trees sang with gentle harmonies, their faceted trunks refracting light into rainbow patterns. Flowers that looked like captured starlight bloomed at their feet, and the air itself seemed to shimmer with life. But as they traveled deeper into the forest, she began to notice signs of wrongness. Some of the crystal trees were dark, their surfaces cracked and lifeless. The musical harmony she'd noticed earlier had gaps in it, like a symphony missing instruments. And there, at the very edge of her perception, she sensed something else, a creeping coldness that made her shiver despite the warm air. The silence began 3 seasons ago, Kellen explained, his voice heavy with grief. It started small, just a few trees in the eastern grove falling quiet. But it spreads, consuming everything in its path. Our healers are baffled. Our wisest elders have no answers. The trees grow desperate, and in their desperation, they call to the stars, for one who understands the language of growth without being bound by our limitations, one who might see what we cannot. He stopped walking and turned to face her, his green eyes intense. You, Zara Voss of the Starpaths, you are the answer to their call. The weight of his words settled over her like a mantle. She thought of her mission, her research, the career she'd built studying plant genetics and ecosystem dynamics. Everything she'd worked for had led her to this moment, to this impossible world where plants sang and trees could call across the void of space. I'm just a botanist, she said, but even as she spoke, she felt the inadequacy of the words. She was something more here, something different. The planet itself seemed to recognize her, welcoming her with a warmth that went beyond temperature. You are hope, Kellen said simply, the first hope we've had since the silence began. As they continued through the grove, Zara found herself stealing glances at her mysterious guide. There was something about him that defied easy categorization. The way he moved with the fluid grace of water, the way the plants leaned toward him as he passed, the way his silver markings seemed to pulse in harmony with the forest's own rhythms. What are you? She asked finally, unable to contain her curiosity. I am Velthry, he said, as if that explained everything. A guardian of the deep harmony, sworn to protect the songs of growth and renewal. My people have tended these groves for 1,000 generations, learning the language of leaf and root, of crystal and light. And the markings on your skin, Kellen paused, touching one of the silver patterns that traced along his forearm. They are the records of my bonding with the grove. Each mark represents a connection made, a song learned, a life touched. They are part of me now, as I am part of the forest. The idea fascinated and terrified her in equal measure. To be so connected to an ecosystem, to feel the pulse of an entire world beneath your skin, it was everything she'd ever dreamed. The journey to Kellen's sanctuary took them through landscapes that defied every law of botany Zara had ever studied. They walked along paths of crystallized root systems that hummed beneath their feet, past groves where the trees grew in perfect spirals toward floating islands suspended impossibly in the air. The deeper they went into Velthara's heart, the more alive everything became. How is this possible? Zara breathed, watching a waterfall flow upward from a crystal pool to nourish the aerial gardens above. Her scanner was going wild, registering energy patterns that shouldn't exist according to any terrestrial science. Velthara dreams, Kellen said simply, his hand trailing along the luminescent bark of a tree that sang soft melodies as they passed. And in dreaming, she shapes reality to match her vision of what life should be. She, the planet's consciousness, what you might call a planetary intelligence, though that term feels limited. Kellen paused at a grove where the trees formed a natural amphitheater, their crystal branches creating intricate geometric patterns overhead. This is where I first heard her voice, when I was barely more than a child. Zara watched him with growing fascination. There was reverence in the way he spoke of the planet, but also something deeper, a connection so profound it bordered on the mystical. What did she tell you? That everything was connected, that the song of one flower affected the harmony of distant forests, that love and loss, growth and decay, were all part of the same eternal cycle. His green eyes found hers, and she felt that strange jolt of recognition again, and that someday, someone would come from the stars who would help us understand the silence that threatens to end all songs. They continued deeper into the forest, following paths that seemed to shift and change when Zara wasn't looking directly at them. The very air grew thicker with life, until she could taste the sweetness of photosynthesis on her tongue and feel the pulse of nutrients flowing through vast underground networks. Tell me about your people, she said as they walked the Velthari. Kellen's expression grew thoughtful. We are gardeners, essentially. Our ancestors learned to harmonize with Velthara's consciousness millennia ago, becoming part of her extended nervous system. We tend the groves, maintain the balance, and serve as translators between the plant consciousness and the smaller creatures who share this world. And the markings. He touched the silver patterns that traced along his throat, and Zara noticed. They seemed to pulse more brightly when he spoke of the planet. Each bonding leaves its mark. The deeper the connection, the more extensive the patterns become. My sister Nyx calls them love letters from the forest. You have a sister? Nyx is our best healer, and perhaps the most gifted at reading the deep harmony. She'll want to meet you, though I suspect she already knows you're here. The plants gossip terribly. There was warmth in his voice when he spoke of his sister, and Zara found herself wanting to know more about his family, his life, his world. As if responding to her thoughts, the forest around them began to change. The crystalline trees grew larger and more elaborate, their branches interweaving to form living architecture. Bridges of woven vines connected floating platforms, and everywhere she looked, Zara saw evidence of a civilization that had learned to live in perfect harmony with nature. Welcome to the Grove of Whispers, Kellen said as they emerged into a vast clearing dominated by a single, enormous tree whose crystal trunk spiraled up into the clouds. My home. The tree was magnificent beyond words. Its faceted surface reflected and refracted light into dancing rainbows, while its branches held structures that seemed grown rather than built, organic pods and platforms that pulsed with gentle bioluminescence. At its base, a pool of liquid light lapped against shores of crystallized earth, and the music that emanated from the entire structure was hauntingly beautiful. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, Zara whispered, her scanner forgotten in her hand as she stared up at the impossible architecture. This is where the planet's consciousness is strongest, Kellen explained, leading her toward the base of the great tree. where her dreams are most vivid and her voice clearest. But also, his expression darkened, where the silence is most threatening. Now that he mentioned it, Zara could sense it, a wrongness at the edge of perception, like a discordant note in the forest symphony. It made her skin crawl and her heart race with instinctive fear. "What exactly is this silence?" she asked as they approached an opening in the tree's base that dilated like an iris to admit them. "Death," Kellen said simply, "but not natural death, which is part of the cycle. This is extinction. Whatever it touches ceases to exist on every level. No decomposition to feed new growth, no energy returned to the soil, no memories left in the deep harmony, just nothing." The interior of the great tree was even more wondrous than its exterior. Corridors of living wood curved gracefully upward, lit by patches of bioluminescent moss that responded to their presence. The walls themselves seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting in rhythm with some vast, slow heartbeat. "Kellen?" A voice called from somewhere ahead, melodic and feminine. "The whispers said you'd returned, and they're singing of a star-touched visitor." "My sister," Kellen murmured to Zara, then called back, "We're coming, Nyx, and yes, the visitor is everything the trees promised." They emerged into a circular chamber at the heart of the tree, where a young woman was tending to what appeared to be a garden of living light. She was clearly Kellen's sister, the same luminescent skin and silver markings, though hers formed different patterns, more flowing and organic. Her hair was shorter, a cascade of white silver that seemed to move with its own gentle breeze, and her eyes were the same forest deep green. "You must be Zara," Nyx said, turning with a smile that lit up the entire chamber. "I've been preparing for your arrival ever since the eastern groves began their morning songs." "Morning songs?" "For the patches of silence," Nyx explained, her expression growing sad. "Every tree that falls quiet leaves an absence in the harmony. We feel each loss like losing part of our own memory." Zara found herself drawn to the garden Nyx had been tending. Up close, she could see that the plants were made of pure energy, their forms shifting and flowing like aurora-given substance. Her scanner was vibrating in her hand, overwhelmed by readings it couldn't interpret. "What are these?" she asked, reaching out tentatively. "Thought blossoms," Nyx said, gently guiding Zara's hand to touch one of the luminous flowers. "Manifestations of the planet's dreams made visible. Each one represents a possibility, a potential future." The moment Zara's fingers made contact, visions flooded her mind. She saw Velthara as it could be, vast forests of crystal and song stretching across continents, floating cities where Velthari and other species lived in perfect harmony, networks of consciousness spanning star systems. But she also saw the alternatives, worlds of silence and emptiness, the silence spreading like a cancer until nothing remained but cold stone and empty space. "The futures are fracturing," Nyx said sadly, her hands still covering Zara's. "Every day, more of the bright possibilities wither while the dark ones grow stronger. The planet is afraid." "A planet can feel fear. Velthara feels everything," Kellen said, moving to stand beside them. "Joy when new life is born, sorrow when old. Trees pass into memory, anger when the balance is threatened, and now, terror at the thought of losing everything she's created." Zara pulled her hand back from the thought blossom, her mind reeling from the contact. "The electromagnetic disturbance that crashed my ship was that her doing." "Partly," Nyx admitted. "She's been calling to the stars for help, sending out waves of distress that interfere with technology. Your ship wasn't the first to be drawn here, though you're the first to survive the landing. Others have crashed, 3 ships in the past season," Kellen said grimly. "We tried to save the occupants, but they were incompatible. Their minds couldn't handle contact with the deep harmony. But mine can. Yours is different," Nyx said, studying Zara with those penetrating green eyes. "There's something in your neural patterns that resonates with the planet's frequency. That's why the thought blossoms respond to you, why the trees sing when you pass." As if to demonstrate her point, the garden around them began to glow more brightly, the energy flowers turning toward Zara like heliotropes following the sun. She could feel their attention, alien but somehow welcoming, as if they recognized something in her that she didn't yet understand herself. "This is all fascinating," Zara said. trying to maintain some scientific objectivity despite the wonder surrounding her. "But I need to understand the silence before I can help you fight it. Can you show me the affected areas?" Kellen and Nyx exchanged a look that spoke of shared concern. "It's dangerous," Kellen warned. "The silence doesn't just kill plants, it affects consciousness itself. Getting too close can be damaging." "I need to see it," Zara insisted. "I can't analyze something from secondhand accounts." "Then we'll go together," Nyx said decisively. "But not until morning. The silence is more active after dark, and even with protection. It's not safe to approach it in the deep night." As if summoned by their conversation, night began to fall over the grove. But unlike the darkness Zara was used to, this was a living night filled with bioluminescent blooms and singing crystals. Zara's dreams were unlike anything she had ever experienced. She found herself floating through vast networks of interconnected consciousness, watching the birth and death of entire ecosystems in moments that felt like eternities. When she finally awakened, the silver moss beneath her was glowing more brightly, and she could feel something different in her neural patterns, a subtle humming that seemed to resonate with the forest's own frequencies. "The integration was successful," Nyx said, appearing at her side with a cup of something that steamed with bioluminescent vapor. "I can see the changes in your biofield. You're becoming compatible with our reality." Zara accepted the cup gratefully, discovering that the liquid tasted like sunlight and growing things. "I dreamed of the network, the connections between worlds. Is it real?" "As real as the thoughts in your head," Nyx confirmed. "More real, in some ways. The physical universe is just the scaffolding that consciousness uses to build its dreams." They were interrupted by Kellen's arrival, but he wasn't alone. Behind him walked a man who immediately commanded Zara's attention. Tall and powerfully built, with the same luminescent skin as the siblings, but marked with different patterns. These were darker, more angular, speaking of conflict and resolution. His hair was black with streaks of silver, and his eyes held depths that suggested he'd seen too much violence and too much loss. "This is Dryas Nightfall," Kellen said by way of introduction. "One of our most skilled protectors, and the person who's been mapping the silence's advance." Dryas stepped forward, and Zara noticed he moved with the controlled grace of a warrior. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of authority tempered by hard-won wisdom. "The star-touched botanist," he said, studying her with eyes the color of storm clouds. "The trees have been singing of your arrival for days." "Zara Voss," she replied, extending her hand in the human gesture of greeting. When Dryas took it, she felt a different kind of connection than she'd experienced with Kellen, something electric and challenging, like touching a live wire. "Careful," Nyx murmured, though whether she was warning Zara or Dryas wasn't clear. "Dryas has a tendency to affect people strongly. It's part of his complicated history." "What kind of history?" Zara asked, genuinely curious about the patterns of scars that traced along Dryas's exposed arms, not the flowing silver marks of harmony, but darker lines that spoke of conflict. "I used to be a sundered," Dryas said bluntly, apparently seeing no point in evasion. "One of those who rejected the deep harmony, who thought individual will was more important than collective consciousness. I led raids against the groves, convinced that the Velthri were weak for surrendering their independence to the plants." The admission hung in the air like a challenge. Zara found herself reassessing everything about him: the controlled movements, the watchful eyes, the way the other treated him with a mixture of respect and wariness. "What changed?" she asked. "I was dying," Dryas said simply, "poisoned by exposure to the early manifestations of the silence. The trees offered to heal me, to share their immunity, but the price was accepting the bond I'd spent years rejecting." He touched one of the darker marks on his throat. "These patterns represent my reformation, the process of learning to hear the songs I'd tried so hard to silence, and now I hunt the silence," he said, his expression growing grim. "I map its advance, rescue survivors from the dead zones, and search for patterns that might help us understand what we're fighting. It's my penance, you might say." Nyx moved between them, her expression troubled. "Dryas, you know why we brought Zara here. She needs to see the affected areas, but it's dangerous," he finished, "more dangerous than either of you realize." The silence has evolved since you last visited the perimeter, Kellen. It's not just killing the plants anymore, it's learning from them. The implications of that statement sent a chill through the chamber. Zara's scientific mind immediately began formulating questions. But Kellen spoke first, learning how it's incorporating their abilities, Darius explained, his warriors' pragmatism cutting through their horror. The dead zones now show signs of organized structure, almost like the silence is trying to build its own version of the deep harmony, but one based on emptiness instead of connection. That's impossible, Nyx protested. The silence is the antithesis of consciousness. It can't create life, Darius corrected, but it can create patterns, structures, and if it's learning from the minds it consumes. He left the sentence unfinished, but the implications were clear. Zara felt a strange mixture of terror and excitement. From a scientific perspective, this was the discovery of a lifetime, a form of anti-consciousness that could mimic the structures of awareness without possessing awareness itself. From a human perspective, it was a nightmare beyond imagining. I still need to see it, she said firmly. If the silence is evolving, then our understanding of it needs to evolve too. And that means direct observation. Then we go together, Darius said, his tone brooking no argument. All of us, if this thing is as dangerous as I suspect, we'll need every advantage we can get. The journey to the perimeter of the infected zone took them through increasingly disturbed landscapes. At first, the changes were subtle: trees whose songs were slightly off-key, flowers that bloomed in wrong colors, patches of ground where the crystal formations seemed somehow dull and lifeless. But as they traveled deeper into the affected region, the wrongness became more pronounced. Stop here, Darius commanded when they reached the crest of a ridge overlooking a valley that had once been a thriving grove. Beyond this point, the protection of the deep harmony doesn't extend. We'll need to link consciousness to maintain our integrity. Link consciousness, Zara asked, though she suspected she already knew what he meant. A temporary joining of minds, Nyx explained, moving to stand between Zara and Kellen. It allows us to share our resistance to the silence, but it also means sharing everything else: thoughts, emotions, memories, everything. The idea was both fascinating and terrifying. On Earth, the concept of true telepathic connection existed only in science fiction. Everything, Kellen confirmed, his green eyes meeting hers, including things you might prefer to keep private. Zara thought of Elena, of the life she'd left behind, of the growing feelings she was developing for this impossible man who spoke the language of trees. The idea of him seeing those conflicted emotions, of him understanding the depth of her attraction to him, made her stomach flutter with anxiety. It's necessary, Darius said, apparently reading her hesitation. The silence feeds on isolation, on the spaces between minds. Connection is the only defense we have. Taking a deep breath, Zara nodded. Tell me what to do. The process was simpler than she'd expected, but more intense than she could have imagined. Nyx guided her through the mental exercises, teaching her to lower her barriers and open her consciousness to the others. When the connection formed, it was like diving into a warm ocean of shared awareness. Suddenly, she could feel Kellen's deep love for the forest, his grief over its suffering, and, underneath that, a growing warmth directed specifically at her that made her pulse quicken. She sensed Nyx's gift for healing, her prophetic abilities that showed her glimpses of possible futures, and her concern for her brother's growing attachment to someone who might not be able to stay. But it was Darius who surprised her most. Beneath his warrior's exterior, she found a soul racked with guilt and self-doubt. A man who'd spent years trying to atone for crimes he could never fully forgive himself for committing. She saw flashes of his past: the raids he'd led, the groves he'd helped destroy, the moment of poisoning that had forced him to choose between death and redemption. And she saw something else, something that made her breath catch. Darius was falling in love with her, just as she was falling in love with Kellen. The triangle of emotion between the three of them was visible in the shared space of their joined consciousness, a complex web of attraction, loyalty, and impossible choices. I'm sorry, Darius said, his mental voice heavy with regret. I didn't mean for you to see that. It's not your fault, Zara replied, trying to sort through the tangle of emotions the connection had revealed. Feelings aren't Something we choose, no. Cullen agreed, his own emotional state a mixture of understanding and territorial concern. But actions are. Before the moment could grow more awkward, Nyx redirected their attention to the valley below. Look, she said. Do you see what Dryas meant about the silence learning? Zara looked and gasped. The valley that should have been filled with crystal trees and singing flowers was instead occupied by structures that mimicked the deep harmony's architecture but felt fundamentally wrong. Twisted spires of what looked like fossilized wood reached toward the sky, connected by bridges of calcified organic matter. And moving between these structures were shapes that might once have been Velthri but now walked with the mechanical precision of automatons. They're not alive, Nyx whispered, her healing senses recoiling from what she was seeing. But they're not dead either. There's something else entirely, consciousness without soul, movement without purpose. The silence is building an army, Dryas said grimly, using the patterns it learned from consuming the deep harmony. It's creating a perverse mirror of everything we are.